investor in climate tech startups in Africa. But today I want to tell you about a love story, but one that doesn't have a happy ending yet. When I started investing in climate tech startups about 7 years ago, I was amazed by the opportunity that I saw. There were tons of amazing entrepreneurs, young, bold, talented, that were here to solve some of the continent's biggest challenges while also saving the planet. And yet what I didn't know is that I was about to embark in one of the most challenging and yet most rewarding chapters of my career. Haha. Climate tech is one of the hottest sectors, as you know, right now in the US and in Europe, and startups over there have raised over $100 billion last year. Innovators are hustling to slash emissions, to capture carbon from the atmosphere, basically in a race to get rich nations to net zero. But in Africa has contributed 4% to global emissions, right? And the population here has a tiny environmental impact. So here, climate tech fulfills a different need. The question is, how do we adapt to an already changing climate while growing the economy sustainably? We need to adapt our food systems, we need to adapt our energy systems, make them more resilient. In a way, we have to actually adopt a climate lens across all sectors of the economy. And that's not easy, right? And so this is why I started looking for entrepreneurs that were tackling this challenge head on. And I fell in love. So Duncan is an entrepreneur that comes from a village in the highlands of Kenya, right at the bottom of this mountain. And in his village, there's a river. And over the years, that river depleted water. There's no water anymore. So when he became an engineer later in life, he came across a technology called DACs, direct air carbon capture. These are machines that can extract CO2 directly from the atmosphere and store them in the soil. And Kenya's geological conditions are actually the best in the world to do this, and so tackling the issue of climate change head on. So he started a company called Octavia Carbon and built the first ever DAC prototype in Africa. They're hoping that they're going to capture 100 tons of CO2 per year and store it in the soil, and in doing so build more resilient energy systems as well. That's their first prototype. Amazing, no? The other story I want to share is that of Wissal. Wissal is a Moroccan entrepreneur. She comes from a family of entrepreneurs in Morocco and a village in the middle of the desert. Similarly to Duncan, she also had 2 water sources growing up. Today there's only 1. And that limits, obviously, the agriculture production. It limits trade in the village. So she built a company called Center Green, which via desalination plants is able to turn salt water into irrigation water, and with permaculture, she's able to turn desert land into arable land and cultivate the deserts. Amazing, right? Except that 2 challenges that Duncan and Wissal face is lack of funding and resources. And this is why I'm saying it's not a happy ending yet, because they're struggling to find what they need to take their companies to scale and therefore scale their impact. And investors out there often cite, especially global investors, political instability, lack of infrastructure, lack of knowledge, like why would I actually put my money to grow, African startups? Absurd, in my view. But this is limiting the potential of entrepreneurs on the continent. Last year, $4.8 billion were raised by African startups in Africa. You might think this is a great number, and it actually did increase from the year before, but it represents 1% of global VC funding in the world. 1%. So clearly we're far behind from what's needed, we're far behind, and what's worse is that it's not evenly distributed. There's only 4 markets that capture about 75% of this capital, and the other 25%, it's for the rest of the continent, which means that places like Sudan, Senegal, Uganda, are not actually having enough to build their own tech ecosystem, their own entrepreneurship ecosystems. And when you look at sectors, climate tech, even if we look at energy, which did get more funding, is still far behind other sectors like fintech, who topped the charts for years. So how do we actually overcome this? How do we generate excitement? But the worst statistic to me is another one. Women entrepreneurs in all of this only get less than 4% of total funding. This is where you all go, boo! Thank you. So this has to change, right? This is incredibly disappointing, and women actually can be agent of change in the fight for climate action. So when I was in Egypt at COP27 last year, there were a lot of ministers talking about these bold initiatives, all this funding will be mobilized, but it's not going down to the entrepreneurs that need it most at the early stage, building the solutions that we need for a more resilient future. And the gap still stands at 350 billion. So it's more urgent than ever to back entrepreneurs like Wissal, like Duncan. They're here on stage at Africa Tech Summit yesterday. We're already enabling the climate transition while building stronger economies and creating jobs for their communities. And the ideas aren't lacking. You're going to hear them in a little bit. There's a lot of young, bold entrepreneurs that want to build new solutions for ocean impact, for environmental impact more broadly, but we need to show up for them. The capital providers, the ecosystem builders, where are we, right, in all of this? And honestly, this is a call to action for all of us. The time is now. We have to all mobilize, and I really would like everyone to join me and other investors to take that leap, so that together with these bold visionaries and their communities, we can actually write that happy ending. Thank you.